remember oftentimes having to bury people. And when they were pronounced dead, I knew, and the family knew, that they did not die because they had somehow lived their time on this earth and God, if you will, was calling them into some majestic heaven. They died because of policy violence. They died because they didn't have health care, because we still choose to give people health care based on where they work, not the fact that they're human beings.
Welcome to The Stakes. I'm Brad Rourke with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan operating foundation that focuses on advancing and defending inclusive democracy. Today, I'm talking to Kettering Senior Fellow, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. Reverend Barber, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Reverend Barber is a national treasure, president of Repairers of the Breach, professor and founding director of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School. You're going to be preaching in our nation's capital on April 27th and bringing Moral Mondays to D.C. the next day, April 28th. What will you be doing here, and what is Moral Mondays?
Thank you so much for asking. I've been asked by the General Minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Ms. Reverend Dr. Terry Hoard Owens, to serve as prophet in residence in D.C. for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and once a month to preach to more than 5,000 congregations and hundreds of thousands of members and other denominations on the moral state of our policy in the country. It's an old tradition that traces as far back as the Hebrew Bible. We'll be actually preaching right in front of the Supreme Court facing the Capitol. And my job is kind of a report from the battleground, what's really going on. And this particular Sunday, we'll be focusing heavily on the biggest moral document in our country, which is the budget. Scripture tells us that where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. And so what we're doing is taking a deep dive look into what this particular budget says about the moral considerations and directions of the current majority in the Congress and how detrimental and destructive they will be for the country.
You know, among the waterfall of items that are really on the national agenda, the budget might have been easy to miss because so much is happening that feels so urgent. People are being disappeared to infamous prisons. Major institutions are being targeted, threatened. I think it's fair to say you're approaching the budget with a high degree of urgency. Can you talk a little bit about the budget as a moral map?
And the force of extremism always wants you to miss that. So take, for instance, every executive order that the president has passed, whether they be constitutional or unconstitutional, can be overturned by the courts or the Congress. Steve Bannon said that they told the president to give them 100 days of thunder, do whatever you want to do, so that we can go after the budget, we can go after the judicial department, small groups of people. We can access millions and millions of people's information. That ought to concern us because the budget determines where the nation will go. But people don't know inside of the budget, they want to put $86 billion more in the military side that the Pentagon hadn't even asked for. A large portion of that into deportations, which will allow the government or whoever has that money to do more damage. You see, the budget funds the damaged machinery, if you will. In this budget, they've not been able to undermine health care. I think there have been over 100 votes to try to overturn the Affordable Care Act. But in this budget, which is a 10-year budget, by the way. 10 years, we have to live with it if it's passed as it is. They want to cut $2 trillion, which will force an $800 billion cut in Medicaid, which will remove 36 million people from Medicaid. That's over almost half, because it's 71 million people on Medicaid. Imagine what that would do to rural hospitals, will do to urban hospitals, will do to poor people with disabilities, will do to working people. And as you go down this budget, you see what they're trying to do is use the budget to dysfunction the government, destroying the administrative state, if they will. And there's no way you can cut $2 trillion and not touch Social Security. This budget, if it was passed today, does not put child tax credit in place, which when we did it during COVID, removed 50% of children from poverty in a country where 51% of our children are poor and or low wage, where there are 140 million poor low wage people. This budget would remove 24 million children from free and reduced lunch. So this budget is destructive, it's deadly, and it's disempowering. Many of the programs and policies that Republicans and Democrats had agreed on and passed will now be dismantled if it moves forward as it is.
I've heard you make that very point. The issues you're talking about they're not partisan issues. They're issues for all people. And you make that point very strongly as president and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign.
Let's start with when we entered into this new season, America already had 140 million people living in poverty and low wealth, 800 people dying a day from poverty, 87 million people uninsured or underinsured. We bring up a budget that's only going to exacerbate that. Right in the time when seniors are facing all of the negatives that are coming now because of the tariffs and the increase in prices, and when many seniors, the only thing they have to exist on is their Social Security, this budget will cut Social Security. The only thing this budget does well is the worst thing, and that is it gives $2 trillion to billionaires who don't need it. And Pope Francis, who died just a few days before this, reminded us constantly that market values alone cannot solve the structural problems necessary to address the issues of poverty and low wages. In fact, market left to itself will undermine those things, particularly this notion of trickle-down economics, because nothing ever trickles down and people are left with their hopes unfulfilled. And for me as a pastor, I remember oftentimes having to bury people. And when they were pronounced dead, I knew, and the family knew, that they did not die because they had somehow lived their time on this earth and God, if you will, was calling them into some majestic heaven. They died because of policy violence. They died because they didn't have health care, because we still choose to give people health care based on where they work, not who they are, and the fact that they're human beings. This budget doesn't do anything to fix that. All it does is makes it worse.
You described earlier that you'll be preaching in our nation's capital on April 27th, but also bringing Moral Mondays to Washington, D.C. on April 28th. Can you say what will happen on Monday, the 28th, and monthly thereafter?
We actually started on Ash Wednesday with a call called it Witness Wednesday, and 500 or so clergy came dressed in vestment with crosses and prayer shawls to make it very clear that we were not there casually. That to not be challenging this budget would in fact be to dismiss our moral responsibility as clergy. And we brought impacted people with us. On Monday, though, we're going to launch. In 2013, we had Moral Monday in North Carolina that went on for 4 years. And, you know, the crowds grew as big as 80,000 people. But more importantly, we challenged then what was going on in the state legislature, very similar to what's going on in the Congress. Massive number of people registered to vote because when they saw clergy and impacted people in the vestibule of the state legislature, they said, what is going on? Why are these people in full regalia? How bad? This must be really bad. And it forced people to tune in. Moral Monday is our goal to tune folk into the moral crisis, to narrow all of the distractions. We can't chase everything Trump does with the executive order. In fact, the goal of extremism is to make you chase all the time so that you can't build a movement because you're always unstable. So in a real sense, all that he's doing with executive orders finds their way into the budget. But what the budget funds many times will be utilized to fund his extreme agenda and or to deny the agendas of those that would challenge his extreme agenda. We said we cannot, as clergy and as impacted people and laity, and not all religious, but many religions of different faith, watch this immoral budget and we not say anything. The first thing Jesus did when he came into the city he was crucified was he turned over the money tables. When the powers that be were using money to be wolf-like rather than to help people. This is very serious because the other side of this is they're taking our money and using it against the American people. If it wasn't so real, you would think it could never happen, that a group of people would weaponize the budget and turn it on its own citizenry. That's like taking my money, buying a gun, and shoot me in the head with it. It's just wrong. And so we're going to be there every first Monday, clergy coming in from all over with impacted people. We will deliver every Monday we're here a high moral stakes analysis of the budget, what's wrong with it, and how it could be better. Nonpartisan think tanks that aren't in any partisan pockets. Then we will go into the Capitol and deliver it to both sides of the aisle, the leadership of both sides of the aisle, and to every member of the United States Congress, the Senate and the House. And then in addition to that, we're calling on 1,000 clergy, rabbis, imams, and others that same weekend to preach and teach from their pulpits about what's going on with this budget and why it is so bad. And so it is a calling forth of our moral resources and utilizing them to bring attention to what's going on. Because right now I'm very concerned that most people don't know what's happening, and they're following this or following that. Like for instance, there's some people that are deciding in this moment to target and to target private corporations. There's a place for that, and I'm not anti that. But in this moment, 36 million people getting cut from healthcare is greater damage than anything that Target would do.
If viewers come upon this video later, after the 27th and the 28th, how can they get involved? How can they learn more, and what should they think about doing?
One, go to www.breachrepairs.org. Get all of the studies that we put down, because we never want people to be loud and wrong. And you can make those studies go viral, share with people what's going on. So that's number one. Number two, join up, sign up for actions to be alerted. Number three, register everybody you can to vote, because we have the most important election is next year. Some people said this past year, but I think after you have actually seen people do what they said they were going to do. Now, I'm not telling you who to vote for, but what I am saying, you must next year look at policy, and decide whether or not those policies, those things that were proposed and passed, do they line up with establishing justice? Do they line up with providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and equal protection under the law? And if they don't, then you have to make a moral decision about who you're going to support. So next year really is the election that says we either like the way things are going or we don't. You don't ever have to endorse a party, but what you ought to be doing is pointing out to people the policies that people are putting in place and let them make their own decision about who they're going to vote for. And then lastly, be prepared to engage in every nonviolent, extremist, and apocalyptic fascists and dictatorial wannabe king leaders want violence. Don't give them that justification. We don't have to. In this country, moral nonviolent movements have changed more realities than we could have ever changed. Let's use our moral and nonviolent power to shift the consciousness of this nation.
Kettering Foundation Senior Fellow, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, thank you for all you do, for your time today, and for being with us.
Thank you so much. And I love Kettering and glad that all that you all do to help amplify what's going on in the country.